the liar who lives within you. How many promises have been made to the mirror before sleep, only to be betrayed at the first sound of the alarm clock in the morning? The chasm between what we declare we want and what we actually do widens with each press of the snooze button. This is our first daily confrontation with an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps everything we claim to want to change is, at its core, an elaborate lie we tell ourselves. A comfortable lie, familiar, almost cozy in its predictability. Morning light is relentless. It doesn't negotiate, doesn't accept excuses, doesn't bend to the narratives we construct during the night. The sun rises indifferent to our unfulfilled promises, and it's precisely this confrontation with objective reality that we so fear. Dostoevsky's underground man knows this contradiction well. He understands that within the human heart exists an irrational force that frequently sabotages our own declared desires. A force that prefers failure to submission to greater ideals, even when this submission would benefit our own well-being. The paradox is terrifying. Within each person exists an obscure will to prove they are free. So free that they can choose their own ruin merely to demonstrate that no one, not even their best version, can tell them what to do. The warm bed in the morning thus becomes the battlefield where we wage our most intimate conflict. The desire to remain immersed in momentary comfort against the promise of a better life built through discipline. The choice seems simple viewed from outside, but in the depths of human consciousness, there exists an almost perverse pleasure in sabotaging one's own potential. When the alarm sounds and the hand automatically extends to silence it, it's not merely sleepiness. It's a silent rebellion against expectations, against the ideal, against the frightening possibility of actually changing. Because to change, truly change, means abandoning the identity we've clung to for so long. The identity of wasted potential, of unfulfilled promise, of I could if I wanted to. There's a strange security in this failure, a comforting familiarity in self-deprecation. Lamentation transforms into an almost religious ritual. I wanted to, but I couldn't. This phrase becomes a mantra, a shield against true action. Because while we remain in the realm of intentions, we're protected from the risk of real failure. After all, we never really tried. The underground man understands that this is the most dangerous freedom, the freedom to sabotage one's own good in the name of autonomy. The ability to reject the obvious path of personal improvement simply because it was prescribed, because it's expected, because others believe it to be best. The paradox is that this destructive freedom ends up imprisoning us in cycles of self-pity and stagnation. What do we really want? Genuine transformation, or just the comfort of saying we desire it? Do we want to change, or do we want the world to change around us while we remain exactly the same? The uncomfortable truth is that there exists a morbid pleasure in reciting the same complaints year after year, in cultivating the same dissatisfactions, in pointing to the same obstacles, as if they were medals from a war we never actually fought. Waking early, this seemingly trivial act, is actually the first and most sincere testimony to the will for transformation. It's a decision nobody applauds, that nobody witnesses, that generates no likes or admiring comments. It's a silent revolution waged in darkness, when nobody is watching, when the only judge is one's own conscience. It's the first step toward a conscious life, a life where actions finally begin to align with declared intentions. The alarm clock isn't just a device for marking time, it's an oracle of truth. Your response to it reveals more about your real intentions than 1,000 well-intentioned words spoken during the day. If you lie to the alarm clock, you're lying to life. If you betray that inaugural moment of the day, you're establishing the pattern for all the other small betrayals that will come. The unfulfilled promises, the postponed commitments, the goals adjusted downward when resistance appears. The underground man laughs at this daily hypocrisy, not because he admires it, but because he recognizes it as profoundly human. He knows that the greatest obstacle between any person and their transformation isn't external circumstances, but this paradoxical will to remain free, even from their own aspiration to greatness. The question remains, poignant and inevitable. What would become of us if, for just one day, we responded to the morning call without resistance, without negotiation, without the inner drama we so cultivate. What would become of us if, just once, action preceded contemplation, and movement came before justification? Weak will, undone life. Will is not a philosophical abstraction, it's a muscle. Like any muscle, it atrophies when not exercised. It weakens in the absence of resistance. It loses its strength when it exists only as concept and never as action. This is one of the raw truths that emerges from Dostoevsky's novels. The man who lives only in the realm of intentions, of abstract ideals, of grand theories about himself, is building not a life, but an elaborate fiction. A weak will isn't born weak. It becomes weak through countless small surrenders. Each time the alarm sounds and is ignored, each time a promise is made and broken minutes later, the will becomes more tenuous, more brittle, less reliable. The person with an atrophied will hasn't lost their capacity to want. They've lost their capacity to convert this wanting into concrete action in the world. Waking early isn't merely a productivity habit. It's a symbolic ritual. It's the daily moment when we declare war on our lower self, the one that prefers immediate comfort to long-term greatness. It's the instant when theory meets practice, when intention is called to materialize, when the abstract desire for change is subjected to the concrete test of action. The morning battle is the microcosm of all other battles we face in life. The way we respond to the alarm clock foretells how we'll respond to all other calls for evolution. The man who cannot conquer his own mattress will hardly conquer more substantial challenges that life will inevitably present. There exists a kind of invisible mathematics governing human development, a mathematics where small daily victories, seemingly insignificant, accumulate to produce monumental transformations over time. And similarly, small daily defeats, so small they barely seem like defeats, accumulate to produce a life of wasted potential. Morning failure carries devastating symbolism precisely because it occurs in the first hours of the day. It's as if, before the day has really begun, we've already been defeated. We've already succumbed. We've already demonstrated who we really are. Not the person who aspires to greatness, but the person who negotiates with their own integrity at the first sign of discomfort. The pain of waking early, and it is a pain, we shouldn't romanticize it, is constructive suffering. It's the type of suffering that forges character. The man understands that there's a crucial difference between suffering that degrades and suffering that elevates. The suffering of remaining in mediocrity out of fear of change degrades. The temporary suffering of confronting internal resistance and overcoming it elevates. There's something profoundly irrational in the way we negotiate with our awakening. We know that the 5, 10, 15 extra minutes of sleep make no qualitative difference in our rest. We know that at the end of these minutes we'll be just as tired as before, perhaps even more so. And yet, in that semi-lucid moment between sleep and wakefulness, we construct a narrative where this small indulgence is absolutely necessary, absolutely justified. This is the voice of rationalization, not reason. The man of strong will understands that life is built in the moments when we resist rationalization, when we refuse to believe the stories we tell ourselves to justify inertia, when we recognize that immediate comfort is often the enemy of lasting greatness. Dostoevsky's fascination with human psychology led him to understand a truth many of us are reluctant to accept. There exists in every human being an almost narcissistic guilt. A guilt that, paradoxically, exempts us from the responsibility to change. When we mentally punish ourselves for not having woken early, for not having kept the promise, for having failed again, we're actually performing a ritual that allows us to continue exactly as we are. This guilt isn't the catalyst for change, it's its substitute. It's an emotional performance that gives the illusion of moral seriousness without requiring real transformation. The person who spends an hour blaming themselves for not waking early could have used this same hour to do something meaningful with their day, despite the late start. But guilt offers a perverse emotional satisfaction that action doesn't provide. Guilt allows us to feel without having to do. conscious, intentional, disciplined awakening is the most eloquent response to the labyrinth of existential doubts in which so many are lost. It's the silent declaration that, regardless of the great philosophical questions that may remain unanswered, we decide to act, we decide to advance, we decide to break the cycle of passive contemplation that so paralyzes. There's practical wisdom in preparing your clothes the night before, as if preparing a uniform for an important battle. In placing the alarm clock far from the bed, forcing the body to move, to commit to verticality. In avoiding the cell phone in the first minutes after waking, refusing to populate the freshly awakened mind with the informational noise of the world. These aren't just productivity hacks, they're profound existential decisions. They're declarations about what kind of person we choose to be. They're moments when we exercise what the man values so highly, the capacity to impose one's own will over the chaos of momentary sensations and impulses. The moment of awakening is sacred precisely because it's the moment when we're most vulnerable to our lower nature. It's when the body, still heavy with sleep, argues persuasively against the ideal. It's when the mind, still foggy, is most susceptible to rationalizations. Overcoming this first resistance of the day is establishing the tone for all other resistances we'll face. The man who awakens consciously, who rises when he decided to rise, who honors the commitment made with the self of the previous night, is performing an act of profound psychological integration. He's demonstrating that there's continuity between intention and action, between planning and execution, between the self that promises and the self that fulfills. This integration is the antidote to the inner fragmentation that Dostoevsky diagnosed with such precision in his most tormented characters. Those divided beings who desire virtue but practice vice, who aspire to greatness but settle for mediocrity, who yearn for transformation but desperately cling to the familiar. Disciplined awakening carries within it this radical promise, the promise that we can become integrated, unified people, whose actions flow naturally from their deepest convictions without the constant friction of self-sabotage. It's an act of rebellion against the inner division that defines the modern condition. The freedom that frightens. There exists a specific terror that afflicts those who finally decide to change. It's not the fear of failure as commonly supposed. It's something deeper, more visceral, the fear of success. The fear of discovering that we really can be different, that we can overcome our limiting patterns, that we can become more expansive versions of ourselves. This paradox, the fear of what we most desire, is at the heart of Dostoevskian psychology. The Russian author understood with painful clarity that human beings frequently cling to their own chains because prison, however suffocating, offers the security of the known. Freedom, on the other hand, carries the terrible weight of responsibility. When the alarm sounds at the determined time, and against all internal protests, we rise without hesitation. We're doing much more than simply starting the day earlier. We're declaring independence from the tyranny of momentary impulses. We're affirming our capacity for self-determination. We're exercising the muscle of authentic freedom, not the false freedom of doing what we want in the moment, but the true freedom of doing what serves our higher self, regardless of internal resistances. This freedom is terrifying precisely because it eliminates our excuses. When we discover that we can, in fact, wake when we decide to wake, not occasionally but consistently, day after day, what else in our narrative of limitation is revealed as fiction? If "I can't wake up early" was just a story we told ourselves, how many other inabilities are equally fictitious? True change doesn't hurt because it's difficult, though it certainly is. It hurts because it's real, because it forces us to confront the truth that we could have been different long ago. We could have started this journey years earlier. We could have overcome that self-imposed limitation the first time it appeared in our path, instead of transforming it into part of our identity. Dostoevsky deeply understood this dynamic of self-imprisonment. His most memorable characters are those trapped not by external circumstances, but by their own internal narratives, by their own elaborate justifications, by their own fear of the vastness that true freedom implies. When a person finally breaks this cycle of self-limitation and begins to act according to their higher vision, something frightening happens. A new version of self begins to emerge. Not all at once, not in a dramatic moment of transformation as in movies, but slowly and inexorably, through small daily victories like the victory over one's own alarm clock. This new version threatens the old one. It threatens relationships built around the old identity. It threatens the comfort of low expectations, the security of being underestimated, the perverse pleasure of occasionally surprising by exceeding a standard that you yourself established as absurdly low. Morning light has this revealing quality we so fear. It illuminates not just the still dark room, but also the shadowy corners of our psyche. It exposes contradictions we'd prefer to leave in twilight. It reveals the distance between who we say we are and who we really are when no one is observing. There's an essential principle here. Light always reveals rot before beauty. The first effect of true consciousness isn't elevation, but the discomfort of honest self-knowledge. We see first our failures, our hypocrisies, our small daily betrayals. And it's precisely this confrontation that so many avoid through prolonged sleep, procrastination, the semi-conscious life that characterizes modern existence. Waking early, in this sense, isn't just an act of discipline, it's an act of existential courage. It's the willingness to see oneself clearly, without the filters of rationalization, without the elaborate justifications we build throughout the day. It's the willingness to witness one's own character in formation, to watch the daily birth of the self we're becoming through our choices. There's an identity construction that occurs silently through these small acts of integrity. Each morning we fulfill the promise made to ourselves. Each day that begins with this small victory, we're declaring to the universe, and, more importantly, to ourselves. I am someone who does what they promise. I am someone whose word has value. I am someone who can trust themselves. This internal reliability is the foundation upon which everything else is built. The man who cannot trust his own promises to himself will hardly be trustworthy in his promises to others. The man who negotiates with his integrity in small things will eventually learn to negotiate in big ones too. On the other hand, one who develops this relationship of trust with themselves, beginning with something as simple as honoring their own alarm clock, is building a reservoir of inner strength that will overflow into all aspects of their life. They're developing what the man values most, an unshakable core of self-determination that remains firm regardless of external circumstances. Genuine transformation begins when we stop explaining why we can't and start proving, silently, that we can. Not with grand declarations, not with grandiose promises for the future, but with small, consistent actions in the present. The man who wakes early doesn't proclaim his discipline, he lives it. He doesn't theorize about willpower, he demonstrates it. He doesn't philosophize about the power of consistency, he embodies it. This is the silent revolution that Dostoevsky envisioned as the only possible salvation for fragmented modern man. Not grand ideologies, not comprehensive philosophical systems, but the daily cultivation of an integrated character through consistent choices aligned with the deepest values. The person who can overcome themselves in the early hours of the morning, who can overcome the inertia of comfort in the name of a greater purpose, is accomplishing the kind of heroism that really matters. Not the dramatic heroism celebrated on social media, but the silent heroism of self-discipline, self-overcoming, self-mastery. And perhaps this is the secret so many seek in books, seminars, motivational videos, and inspirational posts. The ability to fulfill the most basic promise we make to ourselves. The ability to say, I will wake at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. and effectively be standing when the clock marks, not from external obligation, not from circumstantial necessity, but from conscious choice, from sovereign decision, from pure exercise of will. What would become of your life if, for just 1 month, you consistently won this first daily battle? What would change if, for 30 consecutive days, you proved to yourself that your word has value, that your intentions have strength, that your will has power? What version of yourself would emerge from this experiment in integrity? This is the question that hangs in the air, like an invitation, like a challenge. And the answer isn't in another video, another book, another theory. The answer lies in the choice that will be made when the alarm sounds tomorrow morning. If this video touched something in you, if you recognized in this mirror something of your own struggle, share in the comments. What is your greatest morning battle? And what version of yourself would be waiting on the other side of consistency? Subscribe to the channel for more reflections that challenge comfort and open the way for true transformation. And don't forget to leave your like. Each interaction helps us reach more people with this message of self-discipline and personal integrity.